Hello, this is my AP Gov Unit 5 Capstone Project, and I decided to do it on environmental policy making. So before we begin, I want to go over some background on environmental policy making. Environmental policy making includes the process and creation of any legal measures by the government with regards to addressing human activities on the environment. These policies can include and affect many different facets of the environment, such as air and water pollution, wildlife protection, hazardous waste dumping, oil spills, etc. Across U.S. history, there have been many policies and movements reflecting environmental policy making, from the modern conservation movement in the Progressive Era to the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970. The first course concept I would like to address is addressing environmental policy through federalism. The distribution of power among the three national branches and between the federal and state governments allows for multiple access points for stakeholders and institutions to address environmental policy through federalism. A few examples of how federalism has given rise, or rather, a few examples of how federalism has given the national government the power to influence environmental policy include the following. Teddy Roosevelt used his national authority to preserve and protect millions of acres of land. Since then, U.S. presidents have been using their power as the executive to enter and leave international climate agreements, such as the Paris Agreement. As for the legislative, Congress has imposed environmental standards and regulations on industry through legislation. Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act are both examples. As for states, federalism has also given them the power to influence environmental policy as well. For example, states decided to adhere to the principles of the Paris Agreement even after Trump withdrew. This demonstrates yet another check and balance in the federal system, specifically how states have a check over the net power of the national government. Here we see that both the states and the national government have influence over environmental policy. This reflects federalism because it shows how the power is shared between the national and state governments to influence such policy. Even when the national government uses its power to sign or leave international treaties, we see that states, regardless of this outcome, can still decide if they want to follow in the footsteps of the national government or not. This demonstrates how power is split between the federal and state governments to decide environmental policy. The second course concept I would like to address is how different branches of government can influence environmental policy. Different branches of government can influence environmental policy. When it comes to the legislative branch, Congress has played a big role in environmental policy making. Congress has used the Commerce Clause to assume authority over a wide policy area, including protecting the environment. For example, Congress has written regulations that apply to manufacturing and chemical plants to control the emissions these facilities release into the air. In addition, certain congressional standing committees can assume authority and expertise in environmental policy. One such committee is the United States Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. This committee can hold hearings on policy issues and on specific bill proposals, consider and further develop bill proposals through a markup process, and report legislation and recommend changes to the full chamber. This demonstrates the massive influence that certain congressional committees have in how environmental policy is created through the legislative process. As for the bureaucracy, we have the EPA, which is tasked with matters dealing with environmental protection. The EPA has asserted much of its discretionary authority to develop regulations. For example, even though they are not mentioned in the Clean Air Act, the EPA has claimed a vast authority over air pollutants. The third course concept I would like to talk about is how civil rights/civil liberties are used to influence environmental policy. Restrictions on civil liberties are typically justified by public interest. This includes preserving the environment. One such liberty that can be limited in this regard is the right to property. Businesses and industries can be restricted from owning certain land in order to preserve the environment. Specifically, certain laws may restrict ownership of environmentally sensitive areas such as wetlands and forests. People may also use their civil liberties, such as their right to free speech, to protest the environment. This may influence officials in government to implement new policies to protect the environment in response. The fourth course concept I would like to discuss is political views on environmental policy. Both sides of the political spectrum have different views on environmental policy. On the right side, Republicans tend to prioritize economic growth over strict environmental regulations. They often advocate for policies that minimize regulation by the government, believing that excessive regulation is an obstacle for industries and businesses to grow. On the other hand, Democrats are more in favor for environmental regulations, as they believe that protecting the environment is for the greater good. Political socialization plays a significant role in the development of one's views on environmental policymaking. For example, individuals exposed to news coverage and information about climate change may develop stronger opinions on the need for environmental policy. Finally, the last course concept I would like to discuss is how political participation affects environmental policy. Interest groups form over a multitude of issues, with environmental protection being no exception. By forming an interest group, individuals concerned about the environment now have the ability to have their voices heard, gain support for their position, and influence government processes such as elections. Through this, they are able to influence government policy with regards to the environment, thanks to the efforts of many environmental interest groups during the environmental movement. Congress was able to pass legislation on the issue, demonstrating an example of how political participation in the form of interest groups affects policy. One such method that supporters of environmental policy can use to participate in the political system is lobbying. Individuals target lawmakers at multiple levels of government in order to convince them about enacting environmental policy. Thank you for listening to my presentation.